once in a while, a piece of research will get published that the media likes to latch onto to create some pretty scary headlines. And to be honest, this is happening more and more frequently because there's just a lot of studies being done, especially in the nutrition space at the moment. But one has come out very recently, probably about a week or so ago now, that has focused on the link between eating meat and getting type 2 diabetes, and it has resulted in quite a few headlines and videos about the topic, and some of them are a bit out there and have caused me to need to make a video explaining the research so that everyone can just calm down a little bit. So here is an example of some of the headlines that I've been seeing. As you can see, we have, does eating ham, bacon and beef really increase your risk of developing type 2 diabetes? My personal favorite though has been the eating 2 slices of ham a day increases your risk of type 2 diabetes by 15%. That one is, I think, the one that is causing a lot of people to be concerned about their intake of meat. And look, I'm going to be the first person to tell you that processed meat like ham, bacon, salami, all that kind of stuff isn't great for your health and is one of the things that you should be trying to keep to a minimum in your eating habits. But that being said, I don't like telling people to remove food groups entirely from their diet. A lot of these articles and news stories, when you see them run, they will look at a research article and they will usually scroll down to the conclusion and pick out the sentences that have been stated in there. And yes, in the case of this study, they did find an association between eating meat, processed meat and unprocessed meat, and type 2 diabetes. But it's a lot more complicated than that. We have to talk about the study, how they did the study, who was in the study, and really dive into these things to figure out whether that conclusion is something that we should be talking about as much as these news articles are. So what I'm going to do today is exactly that. I'm going to go through the study and explain to you why they've come to that conclusion, but also why we need to be a little bit more careful when we approach studies and how to get the right information out of them. Because when I looked at the study, I didn't think I should stop eating meat. I'm not here to say the study is a bad one. They did their job, they investigated, and they found some associations and they reported on them. That's what a study does. I'm also not here to say that meat doesn't cause type 2 diabetes. Technically, to this day, there is no actual one single cause of diabetes. We just have a list of things that increases the risk for diabetes. And meat, it could be on there. I'll explain that in a little bit. So let's talk about this study. I'll try and explain things as simply as I can for you all, but forgive me, there will be a little bit of explaining to do in how to interpret research studies, which hopefully can just be helpful to you the next time that a news article talks about the next piece of food that is now going to kill you, which is probably going to be next week, in all honesty. So this is the study in question here. As you can see, it is a very long and wordy title, but essentially what they were doing is, this is a meta-analysis. So if you were to look at the levels of evidence, this is pretty much a hierarchy that states which study designs are the most reliable, which means that if you saw a study that was a meta-analysis, for example, it's more reliable and better evidence than a single study on its own. And the reason is because meta-analyses, they take a group of studies, a bunch of studies, looking at one particular topic. So in this case, eating meat and getting type 2 diabetes. They look at however many studies. In this case, it was about 31 studies. And they summarize and they analyze all of these studies to come up with the overall conclusion on the topic, the overall summary. And that's why they tend to be more reliable than just a single study on its own, which makes sense. You have 31 studies, you're looking at one study. The summary of the 31 studies is going to give you more information than just looking at the one study on its own. So this is a meta-analysis, so technically a high level of evidence, pretty reliable, and it's probably why a lot of people have sort of latched onto the findings from it. But I do want to point out that a meta-analysis is only as good as the studies that it is looking at. And that's why, if you do look closely at the hierarchy of evidence, you'll see that at the very top, it's meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials that is the best kind of evidence out there. And this study here, it is not looking at randomized controlled trials. A randomized controlled trial is a very good study where you have two groups, or maybe three, but you have the groups, and only one thing will be different between the group. Now, the study design of a randomized controlled trial is probably more commonly found in the testing of medications. So, for example, you'd have two groups. One group would receive, say, a medication for diabetes, and the other group would not. They would receive like a placebo. And the only difference between these two groups would then be the medication that they're taking, and it's in a controlled environment, ideally, so that you can comfortably say that the differences in whatever outcomes we're looking at, whether that's their type 2 diabetes results or whether that's their blood sugar results, was only down to the medications that they were taking, because that's the only difference. This is a very hard thing to achieve in nutrition research, because it's very hard to control what someone is eating day to day, and you're trying to look at differences between diet, but it's very hard to have people eat the exact same things apart from one thing that you're looking at. The only way to do that would be to keep them somewhere for an extended period of time and to just control what they're eating, which is very, very, very difficult to do, and that's why you just see observational studies when it comes to nutrition research. So observational studies, all they can do is look at a group of people at one particular point in time and see what they're eating and see what their health looks like, and then they have to make links and associations based on that, which is what all these 31 studies that this meta-analysis looked at, that's what all of these studies were doing. And that's where the issues come with these types of studies, where we can't just take what their conclusions are as fact. Their methods aren't the best. They do have some flaws, they do have some limitations, and that's kind of what I want to focus on today, to just show you that yes, it's found something between eating meat and type 2 diabetes, and we shouldn't ignore it completely, because processed meat isn't the greatest thing for your health. But take these findings with a grain of salt, because I'm about to explain, the methods aren't the best. When we talk about methods, the main thing to look at when it's a nutrition-based study is how did we get the information about what the individuals were eating. And so if you look at this study, if you scroll all the way down, there is a section on the actual methods, but this is more so talking about how the meta-analysis kind of selected all of the studies, and these methods aren't quite what I'm after. I'm trying to find out the methods of these individual studies, these 31 studies. I'm trying to find out how they got the nutrition information from the people that participated in those studies. So to do that, you actually have to scroll quite a far way down, all the way past the results and the conclusions, and here we have supplementary material. So it's another document altogether. You click on that, and this actually takes you to a 19-page extra document, and this has the information that I'm looking for. So if you look at this table, this big table that's across 2 pages, this pretty much highlights every single study that this meta-analysis looked at. So all of these studies were investigating the consumption of meat and type 2 diabetes being developed in the populations. And as you can see here, they come from very different year groups, they come from different countries, so it's quite a broad range. Japan, Australia, America, Brazil. So that's good to see. It's good to see variety in the countries that these studies are from. But the thing I'm most interested in is here, in this column here, it says dietary assessment method. This is the method that they use to get the dietary information from all the participants in the study. So this is how they found out what these people were eating. This is the core of these studies, because this is how they found out how much meat people were eating, essentially. And the issue with this is that the majority of these were questionnaires. They give a little bit more information in the main study, but pretty much 26 of the 31 studies that they looked at used food frequency questionnaires. 3 of them used a diet history and 2 of them used diet records. The issue here is the fact that 26 of these studies use food frequency questionnaires to determine the diets of the people in these studies. So I'm going to show you an example of what a food frequency questionnaire looks like. And there isn't one exact way that a food frequency questionnaire can be set up, but what they do is they tend to list certain commonly eaten foods. So they'll usually group these up. They might just say, meat products, dairy products, fruit and vegetables, and grain products. And so those will be the different categories, for example, and within them they'll have commonly eaten foods that belong to each food group. So if we look here, there's meat and fish, for example. You'll have beef, pork, lamb, chicken, bacon, ham. And next to those foods, you need to say how often you are eating that type of food. So that could be never, 1 to 3 times a month, once a week, 5 times a week, once a day. This part here, it does tend to vary, and so unless I went to each of those 26 studies and found the questionnaire that they used, which, the information probably is out there, but I just don't have the time, they'll look something like this. And this isn't the best way to get someone's diet information because, one, it relies on their memory, and if you're going to ask them how often they eat something a week, most people can't even remember what they're eating yesterday. They're just gonna pick a number. And what we do know is that with these food frequency questionnaires, people tend to underestimate the amount of meat that they're eating. What I'm trying to say is that questionnaires aren't the best way to find out what someone's eating. The gold standard way to find out someone's diet information is to actually do a 3-day weight record. And this would mean for 3 days, someone is writing down exactly what they're eating, and they're weighing it to show how much of it they were eating. And this is very hard to achieve in a nutrition study because that just puts the person that's actually participating under a bit of stress. It's a lot of work for them, and participants tend to be volunteers in these types of studies. So that's why you would hardly ever see it. But unless we have something that's substantial, we can't really say we have a very good and accurate idea of what someone is eating. So I'm skeptical that these studies or that this study has found the right information on what people are eating based on the fact that the majority of the studies, 26 of them, were using the questionnaires that look like this to find out what someone's eating, and it's just not accurate. Now, I've moved into the kitchen because I want to pretty much help you guys visualize what the results or findings from this study were trying to say. If you scroll to the results and their main findings, they looked at poultry, which is chicken, turkey. They looked at unprocessed meat, so that's beef, lamb. An example of an unprocessed meat would be like a piece of steak. And then they looked at processed meat, which is ham, bacon, salami, things like that. So they found that for those eating 100 grams of unprocessed meat per day, so that's for things like beef, lamb, for example, steak, the risk of getting type 2 diabetes was 10% higher. And for those eating just 50 grams a day of processed meat, the risk of getting type 2 diabetes was 15% higher. So I just got some bacon out of the fridge and weighed it. And if you look here, I have just 2 pieces of bacon right there. And that is 50 grams. So when this study is saying 50 grams of processed meat, they're saying something that looks like that. That is your 50 grams of processed meat per day that can increase your risk of type 2 diabetes by 15%. That's the conclusion. And this is where that headline came from, the 2 slices of ham can give you diabetes thing. It's because that's the weight. I used bacon, they used ham. So then you may be asking me, what does 100 grams of unprocessed meat look like then, if that is the 50 grams of processed meat, the 2 pieces of bacon? Well, let me show you. I unfortunately don't have a very specific example that I'm able to weigh like I was with the bacon, but Let's have a look here. In this container is two little pieces of steak. They're not large pieces by any means, but the two of them together, they weigh 290 grams. So if we round that up, it's about 300 grams of steak in this, with these two pieces of steak. And this is your unprocessed meat. So 100 grams, well, if you halve this, we can say that one piece is then going to be 150 grams. So I'll put it up closer here. 2/3 of a piece of the steak is your 100 grams, which isn't a lot of meat. So that's what they're talking about when they're saying 100 grams of unprocessed meat. They're talking about something about 2/3 the size of one of these steaks per day can increase your risk of diabetes by 10%, and 50 grams of processed meat, 2 pieces of bacon a day, increasing your risk of type 2 diabetes by 15%. That's what the findings overall in this study have said. I want to point out, when you see that something says that the risk is increased by 10% or 15%, that doesn't mean that you are 10 times more likely to get what they're talking about. So this isn't saying you're 10 times more likely to get type 2 diabetes if you're eating 100 grams of unprocessed meat a day. What it's saying is that whatever your baseline risk was, which unfortunately is a number that we won't actually know, whatever that number is, increases by 10%. So let's say, for example, my risk of getting type 2 diabetes, as it is 10%. This is then saying that if I was eating 100 grams of unprocessed meat a day, then my risk would go from 10% to 11%, because 10% of 10 is 1, and so it increases by 1 to 11%. And when you look at it that way, that's not a pretty big or drastic increase. Obviously, the higher your baseline risk is, the higher that 10% gets, but that's when talking about these words like this increases your risk by however many percent gets a little bit confusing, because people aren't sure where that's actually starting from, and all it makes is a really nice headline. So just keep in mind, this is what it actually means. Your percentage may not be that high, and therefore the risk isn't increasing by a whole lot. In fact, most cases the risk isn't being increased by a tremendous amount. And if you're wondering what the results were in terms of chicken, they actually deemed that chicken was the best option of the three, because 100 grams of poultry, which is chicken or turkey, that ended up being, I think, 8%. But he ended up saying that poultry was the best option of the three, but if you look at it, it's only 2% less than the unprocessed meat. They did conclude that, to be honest, that it was processed meat that was the issue, and that's something I agree with across the board. So now that you can see those amounts that the study was talking about, I want you to remember what I said about the fact that most people, when they're answering food questionnaires or having to remember what they're eating, they tend to underestimate the amounts of food, because they probably just can't remember these things, and no one's going to overestimate, they're going to underestimate. It's just a psychological thing. It's been found in studies. What I want to point out is that this study obviously found that 100 grams of unprocessed meat, so steaks, beef, pork, things like that, was what resulted in the increase of risk, and 50 grams of processed meat is what resulted in the 15% increase in risk of diabetes. I'm thinking maybe, I just want to put it out there, that if people were underestimating the amounts, then it could be that the 100 grams and 50 grams that they're talking about in reality is actually a little bit higher. I think that it's likely that higher amounts of meats are what cause the risks that they are talking about. We'll never know that though, because a study needs to be done, but that is just my logic and my reasoning because of the methods that were used in these studies being questionnaires. They're just not the most reliable, and so we do need to take these things with a grain of salt. As for the headline that says a ham sandwich a day can increase the risk of diabetes, yes, they probably got it because of the fact that 50 grams of processed meat is about 2 slices of ham. But let's remember that there are 2 components of a ham sandwich, and that is the ham and the bread. And if you're eating a ham sandwich made from white bread, we know for a fact that white bread is a simple carbohydrate, which means that it is processed very quickly by your digestive system. Your body processes simple carbohydrates very fast. Those carbohydrates reach your blood much quicker. That can lead to a glucose spike, which we know that can increase the risk of diabetes. So when it comes to a ham sandwich, there is much more evidence that the bread is the thing that is contributing to diabetes than the ham. But that's not to say that the ham has no issues. 100% it does. That ham has issues in terms of its sodium content. It can increase your blood pressure. That ham can lead to high cholesterol levels. It's not great for your heart. That ham is processed. We don't know what other chemicals are being found in there. So I'm not saying that the ham isn't a problem. I'm saying when it comes to type 2 diabetes, we don't really want to add another group of food that people can't eat, because people are already avoiding carbohydrates because of the fact that they're apparently huge risks for type 2 diabetes. People are going carb-free. And what's left for them to eat if they now have to go meat-free? It's just confusing people. So I am of the opinion that you should never tell someone to drop a food group entirely. Instead, just help them make better choices within the food groups. And then once in a while, they can eat whatever they want, because you have to be realistic. The moral of this story is correlation does not equal causation. When it comes to observational studies, findings that you find that don't mean that there's a 100% cause. We can never say based on this study that meat causes type 2 diabetes. They can say it's increasing the risk, which is what they are saying, but because of the methods used to collect the diet information, we don't really know what they were eating. So am I trying to say that this study is completely wrong? No. I just don't like grouping together an entire food group and saying that this is bad and eat less or avoid it. I think that's tricky, and I think it confuses people, and I think the people writing these headlines don't actually care about what you eat. They care about the amount of people clicking on their articles. So make sure you are getting your nutrition information from people that know what they're talking about. Everything needs to be in balance. Your diet is no different. Whole foods, foods that are minimally processed, they're always going to be the best for you, so I will always be recommending those. Processed meats, yes, definitely keep that to a minimum. I don't have the squeakiest clean diet in the entire world. I just try and have balance where I can, and I'm continually learning more and finding ways to adjust and make those small changes. A little change goes a long way. Obviously, that's what I keep saying on this channel. Overall lifestyle will always be the thing that you need to look at when looking at any of the chronic diseases. How much exercise are you doing? How stressed are you? How much sleep are you getting? What are you eating? So there you go. Nutrition research is a very tricky thing, and we are probably going to keep running into headlines that take the results of a study out of context, and I will keep making these videos to point you all in the right direction. I encourage you to have a look at the study that all these articles are talking about. I will link it in the description below. It's open access, which means you can read it, but it's a good idea to always just go to the source rather than listening to a headline. As for whether a ham sandwich a day can give you type 2 diabetes, eat your ham sandwich. It's probably not going to make a huge difference. A ham sandwich a couple times a week, that can be part of a balanced diet. I hope the video was helpful. I hope it has slightly explained these headlines, if you've even seen them in the first place. I know we had a couple of news stories here in Australia talking about it very soon after the results came out, so I just wanted to make a video to clear things up, because there's a lot of noise out there, and I want this channel to be a place where you can come to for some clarity and to get the story straight. Keep making whatever small changes you are to improve your lifestyle and to help your health overall. So I will see you in the next video, and as always, keep playing the long game.